Hello and welcome to this week's Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's current affairs programme. My name's Emma Webb, and this week I'm joined by Peter Whittle, the director of the New Culture Forum, and Philip Kiszely, senior fellow and cultural historian. So let's begin by talking about Pride, which is big news this week. Peter, you tweeted about it.
Why have you come to me? Why have you come to me?
So
because
homophobic. The flags going down Regent Street,
Yes.
to say the least. I mean, there's a lot to comment on, but I know that you tweeted about that specifically.
Yes,
How did you feel seeing those flags up?
Well, the thing is, it's well, first of all, it's just massively overdone, right, for a start. This flag itself is quite ugly. I think it's called Progressive Pride now, isn't that right? This is the Progressive Pride. Yeah. So it actually has a stripe for everything. But you sort of have to wonder what is actually going on here. You know, I mean, where does this originate? And I think that it's interesting that I actually had an interview, didn't if it's not gone out yet, but with someone who worked in human resources, or who, you know, basically who'd written about this. And essentially, the point is this often does come from that era in corporations or in retailers. So whether it's a bank or whether it's Waitrose or wherever it is, it will originate because they have this huge feed-in from people like Stonewall and various different interest groups, highly politicized. And so that's where this is why it seems to have such a grip. It's not just a public sector thing. It's in the private sector. It's absolutely everywhere, and it's gender theory as well as critical race theory. But the point is, to go back to your original point, I mean, it strikes me as being particularly crazy because, and a deliberate political attack, I think, because there was a point at which gay pride, there was a reason for it, right? There was a reason for it, and I'm talking now a long time ago. It's interesting at the very time that there has never been actually less real homophobia and less discrimination, that in fact everything is being ratcheted up. You know, I've been to one gay pride march in my life, and it was when I was in UKIP and we were trying to, you know, basically raise, someone challenged us, they tried to ban us basically. And so much for free speech. So we went along anyway and marched. It's just not basically the kind of thing, it's not my thing. I don't feel particularly a sense of pride or shame or whatever. I am what I am. As Gloria Gaynor says.
But I think at this stage in the game, that's an absolutely, you know, obvious thing to say, isn't it? You know?
Do you think though that in a way, Pride? You said it. You know, this flag is now the progressive flag. It's not the Pride flag.
It's called
the
progressive flag.
Actually, Pride has sort of been hijacked by these highly ideological activists.
I think
they just very quickly to finish my point, because you said that they've got sort of like as parts of the flag for everything, but actually in doing so, originally the rainbow flag was supposed to be a symbol of inclusivity because it included any possible thing that could be on the spectrum, but actually now, because they've added all of these other weird things to it, that actually they've made it exclusionary because it includes you know, I think there's stripes for minorities, there's a circle for intersex, there are all of these different aspects that have made the flag, in fact, in a way, I know some people have said that this looks like colonization, seeing these flags going down Regent Street and seeing it everywhere. But in a way, the flag itself has sort of been colonized by this ideology, because they had something that was a symbol of inclusivity and then they slapped onto it all of these other things.
I think what's happened is it's become ironic. It's now a symbol of oppression. It's ideological oppression, isn't it? You look at it. I was looking at the image of Regent Street. I've not walked down the road, but I've looked at the image, and do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the movie Ben-Hur, you know, where all of these Roman flags in 1959 actually represent Soviet totalitarianism. You know, if you look at the film, it's an allegory, isn't it? It's about 20th century totalitarianism. And this is a kind of totalitarianism that's crept in, hasn't it? And all of a sudden, you've got this show of ideological strength, and my God, if you go against it, it's you're immediately homophobic, but two, you know, you're wicked, and it's here, it's all over. You turn around and there's a flag everywhere. I looked out of the window. I was doing some work at home. I looked out of the window, and there's a post van with a flag on it. You know, there going on the way.
The Uber cars now, when the Uber comes for
yeah,
you.
I came to the train station this afternoon to jump on the train to come here. They're all there, you know, and it's absolute indoctrination. So the irony is really quite delicious, isn't
I've
it?
got a tweet here to get your thoughts on, actually, from Andrew Doyle. He said along those lines, he said, for some these flags represent diversity and inclusion, but for many they symbolise an ideological movement that is hostile to gay people and women's rights, opposes free speech, legitimises violence and bullying, and hounds people out of their jobs if they fail to conform. And what this made me think of was that Colston verdict, that where the argument of the Colston 4 was that this statue was itself a kind of hate crime because it was so offensive to them that it was a symbol of all of these things. But actually, by their own logic, you could say, well, tear down all of these flags because of the reasons that Andrew Doyle has articulated there, that for many people that is what they see when they see these things. They see people who are trying to infringe on women's rights. They see people who have hounded people like Kathleen Stock out of their jobs.
Yes, I mean, the whole point is that there's sort of no real choice in the matter. I mean, you mentioned the shops, but in fact, you know, at schools, in colleges, you know, there are rainbow staircases. Where I used to live in Woolwich, there's a rainbow crossing, you know, a zebra crossing. And you sort of, it's there, you've kind of got to, what do you do in that situation? You know, you're making too much of a gesture if you don't walk up it, but at the same time you sort of think, why are you doing this? Why are you taking up this public space? And I think it's just feels entirely alien to me. As I said, there was a time where actually there was a point to do this and go on demonstrations.
And it feels as though that point, that time's gone.
Oh, years ago, a long time.
Another question for you is that, so I remember when I've never been to a Pride march, but I remember when I was younger seeing images of Pride, and it looked as if it was, you know, it was the way that Pride originally was. It was about gay rights, but it was also just a parade. Whereas now I see all of this footage from around the world of men and naked people and
overtly sexualized,
doing really disgusting things in front of children. People who are representing kinks are there, and also this year particularly all of this drag queen stuff, and particularly drag queens with children, which I think some people, myself included, really worried about. And there was this McCain advert. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yes, I've seen. I saw this McCain advert, which is it was sort of kind of crass beyond belief, actually. But I've never quite got this, actually. You know, quite rightly, blackface in entertainment is not tolerated, right? I've always found drag to be a
gender version of blackface.
A real parody of it's always working class women, actually, I have to say. I've never seen a middle class drag act, actually. It's kind of the blousy, it's Julie Goodyear, Barbara Windsor, or, you know, from Coronation Street, Julie Goodyear character. It's that kind of overblown kind of image of womanhood. I've always felt a little bit uncomfortable. I don't mean to sound sort of pompous about it, but I always have felt that's a bit rough. Now, for some reason, it's extraordinary how this is not only acceptable, but is kind of being utilised.
What I also find really strange is that we're the same people who are really, you know, they praise drag queens and they want them to be in schools and they want them to involve children in that. These are the same people who talk about things like rape culture. They talk about the sexualization of women, but at the same time they are, you know, holding up these drag acts that basically present a caricature of femininity that is highly sexualized, and also somehow made that a symbol of the gay community, as if in some way drag is by exposing young children to a highly sexualized, basically burlesque clown act, that is somehow going to make them more open-minded and more inclusive, when actually they're just exposing them to sexuality in a way that is completely inappropriate.
It seems that the idea of trans identity and drag burlesque have just been kind of folded into one, and they're actually different things.
I would think it would be quite offensive also to to a trans person.
But do you know what's really offensive? It's the way that this thing is presented, and that advert is a really good example of this, of we need this in our lives because we're so dull that we need this kind of sparkly humour. We desperately need this, as though if we don't have that, our lives will be in 50s kind of black and white, whereas they add this sparkle to our lives. And it's so patronising.
Wasn't there a show called something like More Sex Please We're British? Or something like that. It's that kind of mentality that
Well, no, it was actually a show called No Sex Please We're British.
My mistake.
I suppose More Sex Please We're British would be better. But do you know what I mean?
No, exactly. No, this is good for you. Again, it's defying you to complain.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
it's almost like your life is incomplete.
Yes,
you need this in your life, and then you will be complete.
Don't you think that the
most natural thing in the world.
The way that they involve particularly focus on children within this is quite disturbing. So in that advert, what I found really gave me the heebie-jeebies was seeing that, you know, this is a children's food. It's a food that is associated with school. Like, if I'm sorry, if you're out there and you're an adult and you're eating McCain smiley faces, then you need to reassess your life choices. But arranging that, we know what you do of an evening, Peter. Rearranging this food onto the plate and talking about she really puts some meat on it and calls it massive knockers or something, and arranging it and then presenting it. It's almost like trying to. It feels a bit like the gingerbread house. It feels like something that once upon a time you would have been warned against by nursery.
We're really going to look back on this, and you know, first of all, there's the child in America called Desmond is Amazing.
Very, very disturbing.
Which is, if anybody's seen that footage, it's incredibly
Desmond
disturbing.
is amazing.
Desmond is amazing, and this is
when I say incredibly disturbing, I don't mean the child himself, because it's the people around him.
And what they're encouraging him to do, which is essentially be a sexualized drag queen at 11.
Well, he did an act, didn't he? There was a big outrage because he did an act. I think it was in some kind of strip club or some kind of adult venue, and people were giving money or something.
And they were talking about ketamine. He was with adult
on the couch,
and he was doing that, and so it's incredibly abusive. But it really reminds me of the late 60s, early 70s of, you know, the promiscuity thing and the whole idea of free love and all of that kind of thing. And of course, children are sexualized beings. And there was
I mean, the thing I would say though about this, and it's a bit of an umbrella statement, but whether it is the Pride Month, whatever it is, whether it is people tearing down statues, whatever it is, the underlying motive for all of this is to just tear down what is there. Never forget that, because I think it makes things very clear. You know, people often in our sort of like, you know, circles and everything, they'll point out constant hypocrisies and things, and of course you can go on and on and on doing that. I think you have to remember their whole reasoning is to tear down every traditional column and convention, and it doesn't really. I don't think these people really care about trans people particularly. I really don't. I think it's just another avenue.
It's weaponizing.
Yes.
But this whole idea of deconstructing everything. Yes. It's just, in other words, it's smashing everything up.
It's always trying to encroach on the things that people naturally regard as somehow sacred. So there's the whole history aspect to it, and there's the religious aspect to it, but there is something that is ultimately sacred about children, and about making sure that children are not exposed to things that are not appropriate for them when they're young. And you said about it's trying to provoke a complaint, it's trying to provoke a reaction, but I think that there's something about that connects to the destructive aspect of it.
And this is how you can gauge the health of the culture, isn't it? By how we react to these things that are going on around our children. And, you know, some people like us, we're absolutely outraged by this, but some people are absolutely captured by this ideology. And people, you know, ordinary everyday people are captured by this ideology because because everybody's saying it, because people in authority are saying it, because doctors are saying it, because teachers are saying it, because the universities are saying it, but people just really need to push back on it because the culture's saying it.
I mean, if ever there was a case of saying it's the parents I blame, or I blame the parents, we used to hear, why are parents taking kids along to see guys walking along the street with doggy masks on, and and then encouraging the kids to, where are they? Where are these parents? I mean, I know that if you're on social media a lot, you can kind of get a distorted view. If you're on TikTok, a very distorted view. But you have to ask, are these the ones that have been captured by this ideology? They're just exposing.
I've watched a lot of videos of, like you mentioned, Desmond is amazing, and you see the parents who are involved in this sort of thing, and you think the first thing that comes to mind is that it's almost as if that they're so desperate to be progressive that they are progressive in that
willing. They're willing to sacrifice their
children
child
on the altar of
progression.
Yeah. There's something about that I think is almost age old. But there's also this the corporate aspect that has been called woke ink, and we've seen also this week that Halifax have started with these badges for their staff that list their pronouns. And when customers complained, they basically told their customers to stuff it and to close their accounts if they don't agree with it.
I mean, one of the things they said was that we want to start the conversation about gender. This is a bank. We don't have banks telling us about morality.
Also, the conversation has really already started.
The conversation started 50 years ago. But this is a bank, So I think we've got the right, again, to vote with our feet. And I've actually got a mortgage with the Halifax. So again, I don't want that. I don't want anything to do with that. So people should really think about what they're involved with.
This is the point that, again, my human resources interview, it came out in that the actual function of the place, whether it's a bank or indeed a charity or wherever it is, becomes thwarted and actually starts to decline. Because the whole point, the point behind the ideology and woke ideology is something else entirely. So they can actually be quite successful at that, but it's at the expense of the actual business. So this person must have been a social media manager or something, and the Halifax put out saying, frankly, where you can go if you don't agree. And you sort of think that would have been instantly sackable, surely, at one time, as undermining the business. You are the face. No, it's not. I imagine that I think it was a he, his bosses are too frightened of him, actually.
But you saw what happened with Disney's share price has been plummeting and plummeting and plummeting. It's looking like a ski slope at this point.
But is it stopping it? This is the big thing. Is it?
Eventually, you imagine that the finances are important enough that companies will grind to a halt if they keep pursuing it.
I would agree with that, but with one proviso, is that we are talking about McCain's chips. We're talking about the Halifax. But you've got to remember that for the vast bulk of the country not on Twitter, right? They will go into their local branch of the Halifax or whatever, and they won't know anything about this.
So they won't notice the badges. Probably,
they won't.
Or they'll do what I do, which is continue to shop at shops that do this sort of thing, because in some places there is no alternative, particularly during Pride, when every company seems to be doing it. And also M&S have done lots of things that I disagree with, and I continue to be a very loyal shopper.
But it just reflects the wider culture and wider practices in culture. What you've just said there, I think, is really spot on. So it's an organisation actually putting aside what they're supposed to do and just dedicating themselves to a sense of ideology. If you think about education, if you think about the media, that's what's happening right across the board. And I can talk, with a reasonable amount of authority. I've got a lot of experience in education. And what's happening is that disciplines are just going by the wayside. People don't go to university or school to to learn about disciplines anymore. The discipline's there, but they don't learn about it. It's just there to facilitate ideological kind of identity politics.
Taking us slightly off piece from what we were intending to discuss, but there's been a few things in the news this week about that, particularly Sheffield Hallam University getting rid of English literature and joining it with all of these other subjects, so that it's aimed towards future jobs.
Philip Larkin, Keats going by the wayside.
Seamus Heaney as well.
Seamus Heaney, yeah.
So, I mean, it's really not going to end anytime soon.
It's not going to end anytime soon. And this is why I say it's just representative of the broader culture. And while it's shocking, we shouldn't be surprised by it, you know, and it's going to escalate.
In that vein, there have been a lot of stories this week that touch on essentially the ongoing theme of the last 2 years, which is how evil and nasty Britain is. And the British Council, this week there was a story in the Daily Mail talking about how the British Council, which is taxpayer funded, last year they received £179 million of taxpayer money, and their job is to promote Britain abroad. What they've done is they've listed in an internal document which has been released through I think it was a Freedom of Information request. They had listed the UK as one of the countries, this is a paraphrase, blighted by extreme and violent racial tensions alongside countries like Afghanistan, Libya and Russia. Interestingly, not China. They didn't mention China as being genocidal at all. And they said in this internal guide that this racism permeates British institutions, with ethnic conflicts, civil disturbances and genocides that have been witnessed in on all continents, and then list Britain as amongst that.
This was an internal report?
It was an internal report, and also last year they issued an anti-discrimination guide to staff that advised them against using words like the Queen's English or the word Brit, despite the fact that they've got a royal charter and that they are the British Council and that their patron is the Queen.
It's almost, it's this thing about masochism, isn't it? And this idea of self-flagellation and how much we enjoy that. And well, you know, how much some people enjoy that, how much the dominant culture enjoys that. But I always think of, when I see these things, I always think of what Douglas Murray says, is the idea it's okay being a masochist until you meet a real sadist, you know, and he always says that, you know, yes, we hate you as well. And China is just stood in the wings there. You mentioned China, and you know, we're just pouring ourselves down the drain, aren't we? And just waiting for you know, a very, very scary dictatorship to stand in our way.
Do you think that they should, well, organisations in general that do this sort of thing, that receive taxpayer money, but the British Council, their purpose is to promote Britain abroad. What they seem to be doing is trying to diminish us as much as possible. Yeah. Should they therefore just have I know that they've already lost some taxpayer money, but should they just have the plug pulled on all of that?
Yes, and also absolutely straight up, yes.
Yeah, but the problem is that the plug pullers, the people who should pull the plug, feel exactly the same. You know, and therein is the real issue, isn't it? You know, it's absolutely, to use their term, it's absolutely systemic. It's there. And
the thing is that we've got this odd situation, as I think we've discussed before, of a revolution from above. It was less than a month ago that the place was draped in Union Jacks, that people were out having parties, that it was the most wonderful, it was like, looking at it now, it was like a wonderful sort of therapy session, you know, where you enjoy, and yet here are the institutions basically coming out with this stuff. They're not stopping. I know I said that before, but they're just not stopping. It doesn't matter. The only way, and Philip is completely right, you know, it's like a kind of network, so they're not going to have their money taken away. But they should be, and similarly with the British Library.
and it's almost symbolically, isn't it? You know, with these pride flags, it's almost punishment for the fun we had for the Jubilee, isn't it? You know, we really enjoyed ourselves there. Right? Okay. Well, no, this is good
if
for
you. If you want to shag your flags, you have to shag ours too.
Yes. No, I think that is the only way. And at one point, this government did come near to saying something like that. That if you keep pushing things that you're not meant to be pushing. You know, if you don't do your job properly, then we will revise the money. In the case of like the British Library, it was 92 million. And they were trying to decolonize their whole collection and all of that. It's very familiar to us now. But ultimately, it's money talks, or lack of money talks.
But you touched on this, Philip, that they are looking for things to flagellate themselves over. So another story that was in the news this week is this Cambridge college that has decided to rename some of its accommodation, one of its accommodation blocks. And this is Clare College in Cambridge, and they have an accommodation that is called the Colony, and they're going to change its name to Castle Court. But the reason isn't because there are links with slavery, it's because there are slavery connotations just simply to the word colony. You could easily say that there are connotations to ants, couldn't you? Or anything. Penal colony was another thing that they were suggesting. They don't know where the name comes from. They think it's because it's out away from the college, and students used to refer to it as being like a penal colony because it's out there and far away. But it's like when Rhodes Primary School was renamed because its name is Rhodes and could have connotations of Cecil Rhodes, even though it wasn't named after Cecil Rhodes. Or when they tried to remove a statue of Robert Peel, but it was the wrong Robert Peel, it wasn't the person that they were talking about. It's entirely imagined offence. It's the same as when we saw, Lord Singh had those issues with the BBC where they imagined that his talk about Sikhism was going to offend an imagined community of Muslims. No one had complained. Everything seems to be to do with words and imagination and absolutely nothing to do with facts and reality.
It has all the connotations of a disease, doesn't it? It's run rampant. So it goes from probably legitimate concerns over here to absolutely imagined nonsense in nothing flat. It's like a disease ripping through the country.
Ed West in his Substack recently used a brilliant term that I think needs to be widely coined, which is political hypochondria.
Yeah.
Because there is an element to a lot of this that feels like some kind of collective mental illness.
Yeah. No, it is a form of who was it said, those that the gods want to destroy, they first make mad.
Timely. So speaking of people who have gone completely mad, the Church of England as well, because constantly in the news at the moment. There's a sort of like brief shout out. Calvin Robinson was ordained last week, and so has gone to the Free Church of England, because apparently the Church of England is not broad enough a church to include people who just believe in the gospel and the old values of the Church of England. But this week, finally, the much anticipated report of the Archbishop's Racial Justice Commission has been released by Lord I think it's pronounced Boateng. And he has said that the Church of England should contribute towards a 4 million national memorial to victims of the slave trade. Bear in mind that the church is so cash-strapped that they're talking about closing down, getting rid of the parish system and closing down churches, and can't get bums on seats, never mind anything into the penny box. So he's suggesting that they should contribute to this. And he said that this is a quote, the Church of England did not as an institution call out the evil nature of what was happening. Instead, the church and many clergy benefited from it. He talks about the church's culpability in the slave trade and the harm done to the psychology of generations and to the moral underpinning of the church that is in some way beyond measure. It's so without historical context that the Church of England, as part of the establishment, totally overlooks the clergy that were involved in the abolition of the slave trade. It overlooks the fact that for many, many years we were an anti-slavery state, which is what Giles Zudi, the historian,
we abolished
says.
Slavery.
But also the fact that when we talk about reparations, and this is all in the context of discussions about reparations, as was the Clare College story as well, because they recently sent back this, I think it was a sort of bronze chicken back to somewhere that it originated. But it ignores the fact that this country, the Church of England being part of that establishment, spent such a fortune and so many men's lives, white men's lives, trying to fight for the abolition of slavery, and the only country historically to do that. So when these sorts of things are put out by the Church of England, it seems particularly grievous coming from them, because talking of the moral underpinnings of the church, surely they have a duty to be fair-minded, to have an understanding of justice that is more holistic than this narrow ideological focus.
Absolutely.
I mean, the discussion about slavery, if you listen to it and you've got no idea about context, and this is why it's so damaging to children and it's so damaging to young people. If you listen to these discussions, it's almost as though slavery petered out about 5 years ago. You know, that's what you take from these discussions. You know, not that we're talking hundreds of years ago, not that we tore ourselves apart, that we abolished slavery. As you say, the Royal Navy lost thousands of people policing the oceans, stamping it out. All of that stuff, none of that narrative is part of it. It's just this idea that we've got this, Calvin Robinson actually calls it ancestral sin, doesn't he? You know, we carry this ancestral sin, and it's almost as though that ancestral sin was around, you know, because of things we did 3 days ago. And that comes back to Peter's point. It's all about destroying things, isn't it? You remove context from the conversation, you can do anything, and that's why they do it.
Well, if you take away someone's backstory, basically, you know, it's the oldest psychological trick, isn't it? But I think, you know, as you say, with slavery is a very effective way in to the general history. You know, so basically, come on, you know, this is an awful thing that happened around the world, and it's a great way in because you're not going to get any resistance. But that way through, you're into the whole of history now, because frankly, you know, it's not just about slavery. It's all sorts of, it will soon be all various other aspects and ideologies and critical theories that are applied to almost every part of history.
Well, it's interesting that Prince Charles, and it was particularly you used the phrase "revolution from above." Prince Charles coming out and saying that we should be teaching slavery like we teach the Holocaust. Well, when I was at school, I learnt an awful lot about the transatlantic slave trade.
I don't know where he's been.
I agree, but not in the way that he may think, that we need to be teaching more history, and more history about the slave trade, sure. Because whenever I mention Thomas Pellow, nobody knows who I'm talking about, but he was a little boy who was kidnapped by Barbary slave traders and taken to build, you know, I think he was taken to somewhere like Meknes in Morocco. There are huge blind spots in our understanding of the international history of slavery, how the transatlantic slave trade fit into that. And also, like you were saying, you know, it would be very good if students were also taught about the ins and outs and nuances of how we work to abolish the slave trade. How about a memorial to all of those men who died trying to abolish the slave trade, or even to explain in a more nuanced fashion, rather than always just lumping slavery and empire in together, explain to children the relationship between those two things.
Well, actually, that was what I was going to say, actually, because when we talk about empire, or when they talk about empire, it's always the same. They talk about the British Empire as though it was the most toxic empire ever. And of course it was the most benign by a million miles. Okay, but if we're talking about slavery, we probably need to talk about the Ottoman Empire. You know, we, as you say, we need to talk about North Africa. We need to talk about in its manifold manifestations. So, and of course we don't. It's this kind of, it's almost the kind of gaslighting, isn't it? It's a cultural gaslighting where, you know, if I tell you that you're horrible, and I tell you over and over and over again, if you're insecure, as the culture is, then you will believe it. And that, I think that's precisely what's been happening, certainly over the last 10 years, but you could say over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Oh
yes, it's been sort of chipped away at, and then suddenly, you know, I think we've talked about this before, but with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, and that, it's suddenly like they thought, wow, we've got a moment, because it was the speed with which it all happened.
I had a moment a couple of days ago, and I was doing I was up really early to do breakfast radio, and I was coming into London, no tubes running, coming in a cab, and I was going past all these beautiful, grand buildings and all of the little pride flags fluttering in the early morning breeze. And it was the morning that this news had been released about Prince Charles talking about the slave trade being taught in the same way that we teach the Holocaust. And I had this, it was the combination of things gave me this really horrible sinking feeling that Church of England, we know that is far gone. But the institution of monarchy, particularly after the Platinum Jubilee, I felt for a brief blissful window that this was in safe hands. And then in the following weeks, Prince Charles has done absolutely everything he could have possibly thought of to do.
To undermine that.
To undermine this passing of the baton that was so majestically managed by the Platinum Jubilee. He just managed to destroy all of that confidence.
Well, yes, I mean, look, I'd agree on that, but there are to speculate, there are two ways of looking at it. There's that way, but also why has it come about just after the Platinum Jubilee? Has someone else got some kind of agenda? Newspapers sit on certain stories for a long time, right? Now, in the 1990s, vis the monarchy, the Murdoch press, who I think are the worst because they're insidious, they have their nice official leaders, which are all very nice about the Queen and everything, but they have some vile articles, like Camilla Long recently about the Jubilee. It's broadly anti-monarchy because Murdoch is anti-monarchy. So you sort of felt there was another thing going on. Why is this sort of thing about the money in the case from the Arab Emirates? Why has it come up now? And the thing with the Rwanda comment was a private conversation, been leaked. The slavery thing, I think, is just is wrong. He's absolutely wrong. And as you said, I think where has he been? Because it's been, one of those topics, along with the Tudors and the Egyptians, that is taught to kids.
And presumably because he didn't have an education in a state school like most people in the country.
I just wonder, is it sort of that is one way, or the other way is it is entirely self-inflicted by him.
Well, I think even if it is the case that the stories have been put out intentionally after the Jubilee, regardless, Prince Charles still accepted a suitcase full of money from a Qatari politician, and then to say that for the palace to then say this was above board because it was just immediately given to the Prince's Trust and that was all dealt with. Well, I'm sorry, but a Qatari politician, I presume, has a bank account, and so does the Prince's Trust, and so they could have transferred that money. Why was it in a suitcase if it was above board? Why would you hand over cash in a suitcase?
He can't help himself from being overtly political, and it's catastrophic every time he does it. But he really can't help himself, I don't think.
But he's getting so close to the throne that these stories are putting the entire institution of the monarchy in jeopardy, surely. And I think that when, it seems to me, my impression is that he doesn't want to let go of his ability to say certain things. And with Rwanda and with the slavery thing, and also to some degree with the environmental stuff,
I think more so than anything else, the environmental stuff.
He's traipsing into territory that is explosive, that is riddled with landmines, and that stuff is highly divisive now because it's become politicized. So he may think, as many people wrongly do, that these subjects are not areas that are political, but he's wrong. And if he doesn't have the intuition that the Queen has had so brilliantly throughout her reign as to what she should say and what she shouldn't, it seems that he has got no compass whatsoever. And when he is the monarch, my fear is that not only does he not have the sort of nous to be able to manage it subtly, but also that he doesn't really want to. That he's lived his entire life having opinions and visiting Qatari and Gulf monarchies and hanging out with these people and being influenced by them. And he doesn't want to give all of that up if he becomes king.
I think there's an element of that. I think there's another element as well, which, and the Tory party do this all the time, they court this minority of woke chattering class people who have all of these progressive opinions, and they spend so much time trying to sell themselves to these people. and it's absolutely
It's
absurd. But it's cheap, certainly. But it's self-abusive because these people detest them.
Yeah.
And there's this, as we saw the Jubilee, there's all of these millions of people who absolutely love them and who really dislike all of that stuff. I really don't know why they do it. It's like the Tory party.
I think
they
you've
always
touched
do it.
on something really key there, which is that it's a lack of dignity. That's one of the things that strikes me about this suitcase thing, is that the way that Prince Charles conducts himself is with a lack of dignity. It's not regal. It's not like Kate and William.
No, but I mean, I think that ship has certainly sailed. I mean, if you were around in the 90s with the squidgy tapes and all the things, I think that's...
Do I have a whole world of fun to discover?
Oh, well, no, you must know all about it.
I don't know.
Oh, well, you've got a lot of fun to...
Yeah, there's a little bit of
I mean,
fun
the whole idea of dignity is sort of gone there. I mean, I think if one's going to be very cynical, one could say that they've got the survival instinct, so that by aligning... I think the environment one actually, as you say, is the most overt, but it's the safest because you can be conservative environmentally. The Queen has even got the Queen's canopy, the trees and everything. And so essentially you're onto an easier wicket there. I agree totally. It's like hug a hoodie, and it's also like the going out with the Huskies. Cameron did, he went off to the Arctic with these Huskies, caring about the environment and everything. People weren't fooled for a minute by it, but far more importantly, the Guardian were not going to love him more. It's like, all this effort that the government went into about the NHS and our NHS and clapping. Do they really think the majority of people, or many people in the NHS, are going to now vote Tory? It is instilled in them not to. It is absolutely, it's not going to work.
But they keep doing it again and again and again, and he's just doing all of those same things. I mean, there are a couple of points to that. One of the point that you made a while ago, which was, maybe he might settle into the role, but it might be that people do transfer their allegiance, and it might settle down, and there's an element of that. But you said that before all of this stuff.
I think that could happen. I think there's a great play that was on at the theatre 10 years ago called King Charles III, and the BBC made a very good film adaptation of it. You can get it on Amazon or any of the streaming service. Very Tim Pickett-Smith plays Charles. What happens is that the Queen's gone, and essentially he refuses to sign a bill. And what happens is that there is this huge, protest, which becomes not quite a civil war, but nearly. And in the play, Kate emerges as this steely, not exactly Lady Macbeth, but you will not. Destroy my son's inheritance. And so she basically forces William to force his father to sign an abdication. So what you could possibly see happening is not something like that, but what would be dignified is if Charles, after about 3 or 4 years, somehow thought, okay, I've kept the principle intact of the hereditary monarchy, but I'm now standing back, taking in favour of my son William.
Which is actually the second point I was going to make there. I mean, the saviour obviously is Kate and William to a certain extent, and that's the future, with the children as well, So yeah, but it's a really interesting. The play is a really interesting one because it's classical, isn't it?
I think we've got to finish. Just one little thing on this point. I was walking yesterday. It was in St James's, and there was this lovely old shop, quite old style shop. But in the window there was a picture of the Queen with a Union Jack and a picture of Prince William. And I thought that spoke volumes.
That says it all. Well, that's a nice note to end on.
Good way to
So
end.
thank you very much, Peter.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Emma.
Philip, and thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment below. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next time on Newspeak.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead. for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.